You're listening to Beyond Bossfights, gaming conversations with interesting people. Hello, and welcome to Beyond Bossfights, Episode 5. This is Brax Wolf. Thanks for listening today. Today we're going to talk about community in gaming, which is a huge topic. In fact, it's so big that I'm going to have to break this episode into 2 episodes. And today you're going to hear the first half of those. Today my guest is Roger Edwards from Contains Moderate Peril blog and podcast. Roger is a really interesting guy. I've always been fascinated to listen to his podcast and to read some of the things that he puts on his blog. He blogs about not only games, but also a lot of movies, pop culture. And when I talk about movies, it's not just I'm going to review the latest movie that came out. He will review movies that interest him that are from as far back as black and white films and things that fall into the science fiction and horror genre that kind of are of similar interest to those who would be involved in video games as well. As far as the podcast goes, I've been listening to Contains Moderate Peril for probably a little over a year now, maybe a year and a half. He and Brian do a great job on that podcast. In fact, if you listen very closely, I think you might notice a few similarities between my podcast and his, and that's probably somewhat intentional because when you throw a podcast together, guess what? You take your favorite parts from the ones that you like and you try and stitch them together into some kind of a Frankenstein that folks are going to enjoy. So we had so much to say today about one section of the show, specifically the Newbie Blogger Initiative, that we only got through one subsection of the community discussion, and that is the in-game communities, the guilds, the kinships, the tools that are given to us via the developers and the games themselves. So that is really the only section that we get through. I think you're going to find it enjoyable, though. And once we get finished with that, we move right on into the Newbie Blogger Initiative, which is an event that's going on through the month of May in 2014. And as we kind of go into great detail and length to explain the benefits of such, just to give you kind of a high-level idea of what the Newbie Blogger Initiative is, it is a conglomerate of gaming bloggers, podcasters, and video streamers that puts together the folks that are just now starting these blogs and streams and podcasts up with those that have a little bit more experience and exposure. And it is a knowledge-sharing opportunity. It is an exposure opportunity for the new folks. It is a learning opportunity for everybody. And this year they're even adding some things such as gaming events for the participants. I've already participated in a Hearthstone tournament. Never even played one of these Magic the Gathering type card games before, but gave Hearthstone a try. I really actually am enjoying the game. It's one that I find I can pop in and play a 10-minute match and then pop back out of, which is really conducive to the way I have to game nowadays. Got knocked out in the first round, but that's neither here nor there. It was the experience that counts. I know they have some other events that they're bouncing around. It's a very organized effort this year. I will have some links in the show notes, not only to the Newbie Blogger Initiative blog, but also to their forum, which is where a lot of the conversation is happening right now. So thank you for being a part of the Beyond Bossfights community. Today we have with us Roger Edwards from Contains Moderate Peril, which is a blog and podcast about gaming and pop culture. Did you have anything you wanted to add about the subjects that you cover on CMP, Roger?
No, really. It's CMP has a very elastic remit, so we are able to encompass anything new, or as some people would say, we make it up as we go along.
I wanted to thank you very much for being on today, not only not only for being on today, but also for all of the support that you've shown in the podcast and for allowing me to do guest posts on your blog and stuff like this. I think it's fair to say, without you and I talking very often, we actually communicate quite a bit because it seems like we're emailing each other a couple times a week to get something done. So I appreciate everything that you've done for me, and it's been a fun ride.
Oh, you're more than welcome, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me on your show.
Now, you've listened, so you know that one of the first things we do whenever I have a guest on is I have them give their definitive gaming history so that folks will know kind of where they're coming from. So could you share a little bit about what kind of games you've played in the past, maybe how you got started, and what has led you up to what you're playing today?
Certainly. During the early 80s, shall we say, arcade games, I spent a lot of time playing arcade games, and round about that time the sort of home computing boom started, and at the school that I was attending at the time, they invested heavily in computing and made it available, and I signed up and wanted to get involved. And what I'd established quite quickly was the fact that it wasn't at all like Tron, which was big at the time, around about 1982. BBC Micros were the computer of choice at the time. During the late 80s, early 90s, I left school, I started work. I started buying consoles for myself around about that time, where a lot of other people who are younger, consoles would have been gifts at Christmas and things like that. And I was in a position where I bought myself a Nintendo system and I upgraded to the Super Nintendo system, and I also had a Mega Drive, a different brand name in the UK. I think it was the Sega Genesis.
Okay.
And I spent a lot of time on a lot of those classic titles. Work-wise, in the 90s, I was working for a government department, and at that time it was just changing from a network based around dumb terminals to a PC-based network, and I took on a job role as the computer support officer for the particular office that I was working at, and I got a crash course in PCs, and that's how I got a foothold in the IT industry. And at the same time, my sister, who was writing for a magazine, upgraded her home computer, and I inherited a Compaq 486 DX4, and all these things came together, and I went out and bought myself a copy of Doom, and then it all went downhill from then. The internet boom started a few years later, and I got an America Online account, and the first online game I played was Air Warrior. In some respects, it was an MMO. And as the years progressed, I moved away from console gaming and stuck mainly to the PCs. I believe the last console I had was a Sega Dreamcast. I like that. And yeah, I just have always been interested in technology, also always been interested in board games as well as, technology-based games. So it was a natural extension to get into consoles and PCs, and round about 2008 I took the plunge into my first MMO, which was Lotro, which I still have a great deal of affection for, and I've been gaming continuously ever since, really.
So what we're going to be talking about community in this episode, and so what was the trigger for you to decide, I want to start this blog and I want to try and do a podcast and make it about gaming?
I had my first experience with online communities when I was playing some multiplayer games, usually sort of World War II shooters. And I became aware of the fact that people were setting up clans, and then there would be clan associated sites. I got invited into one, and I was quite interested in the sort of sense of community and culture around that. And then obviously when I started playing MMOs and Lotro, it became abundantly clear that a wealth of information and knowledge and social interaction was taking place on the internet. And I just thought, yes, I'm going to participate in that. I was also blogging independently of gaming at the time. I was writing about movies and other things of interest. So it just made common sense to start another website and start writing primarily at the time about Lotro. I started up a site called Misadventures in Lotro, and that sort of grew and picked up a bit of an audience. And as a result of that, I met Brian. Well, I got in touch with Brian. Brian was running the Mordor or Bust podcast at the time. And I just thought to myself, you need a European correspondent. And I invited myself onto his show. And that just led to a sort of permanent podcasting relationship. Misadventures in Lotro then became Misadventures in Gaming because I wanted to broaden my horizons. And after a while, it just seemed sense to merge all my blogging into what is now contains Moderate Peril.
Very cool. Yeah, that's interesting to hear about that evolution. I had never heard that story before. When I started my blog here not too long ago, I did it, and the podcast as well, with kind of an idea of being a little bit more broad than what I'd started out in. So today we're going to be talking about community in gaming. And this can be a very, very large topic. I've broken it down into several different key categories, and hopefully we can get through them all in some kind of relative interesting fashion. I didn't find a lot of information about general communities in gaming on the internet when I did some research for this show, but I did run across a somewhat older slideshow called The Importance of User Communities in Online Games. And this slideshow was done by Julian Wera, who at the time was the European Public Relations Manager at Gala Networks, and I think he still has something to do with PR, if I remember right. And quite honestly, the slideshow it's what you would expect of a PowerPoint slideshow. It's got a few good points here and there, but it's nothing that's completely mind-blowing. It's something that they would probably show when the slideshow came out in 2009 to managers of gaming companies who potentially understood about video gaming and knew the business of video gaming, but didn't yet understand the importance of community within that. And some of the points I wanted to pull out from that slideshow, and the link for this slideshow will be in the show notes. He was trying to make the point that users may come for the game, but they'll stay for the community. So they may see the game, the eye candy may catch their attention, but that might not be enough to actually keep them in the game. And I think we'll talk about this probably a little bit more, but especially in these MMO games, I want to say maybe previous generation of MMO games where grind was a major focus. Was the grind enough to keep people there, or was it the community that kept people there? I would argue maybe that the community was something that kept people grinding. Another one of the points that he wanted to pull out was community features are crucial to user retention in online games. It kind of goes with the first one. You come in, you play the game, maybe you get tired of the game after a while, but you made a group of friends there. Are you going to leave that group of friends? Couple more points there. Gaming communities build brand loyalty. I think that's very true, and we'll touch on that. Gaming communities are two-sided blade and need to receive professional and quality support from the game's operators. This is probably one of the most important points that I'm not sure everybody has completely even grasped yet, as far as the gaming companies that are out there today. I think some of the newer ones are people that have come in and infused this idea into some of the even maybe older ones like Sony. But I think there's still some companies out there that don't really understand how to support the communities that spring up around their games. Did you want to comment on any of those points before we go on?
I think they're all very relevant. I particularly think the last one is, I hope that's a subject that we open up a little later, because I think we've seen some examples of that being done well, and also some examples of it being done very, very poorly.
So one of the things I wanted to maybe bat around a little bit was, when did community become such a large part of gaming? Because I can remember you talked about starting on consoles. I started on consoles, and probably the biggest community I was involved in high school was I would go over to my neighbor's house about 2 or 3 days a week, and we would play Super Mario Brothers 2 on his Nintendo Entertainment System, and then we would talk about it together. That was about as big as our community got at that time. But at some point, this has become a very large offshoot of the gaming industry today. When do you think that happened?
It's difficult to pin down. I mean, obviously, when the Nintendo consoles were big, which is sort of pre-internet times, there was still a community that existed around certain publications. And I can remember people at my college creating their own sort of photocopied fan magazines based around games and activities, etc. And I can also remember people pinning on notice boards sort of competitive playing and inviting people around to the house. So that you can see aspects of community being prevalent there in the late 80s. But I think as soon as the internet came along, even in its earliest incarnation, as soon as you had games with an online capability and people had access to dial-up accounts, you would get some sort of grouping of people with a common interest. I can remember sites, the most basics of sites, springing up around certain games quite early. The nature of the internet itself just lends itself to providing people with a platform to communicate with. So I think the communities have always been there, and as soon as a new medium presented itself for people to utilize, they were just all over it. So I think you can't really pinpoint a specific date. I think it's just been a process of absorption or osmosis, or however you wish to describe it.
Yeah, I remember that we used to, my friend and I, who would play together very often, we would know the codes on the keypad for all the cheats in the game, I guess. On the Nintendo I'm talking about now. But I don't remember how we got those. I don't know that either one of us had a subscription to one of those magazines. But I guess we must have been talking to others that had similar interests that could provide us with that information. But I honestly don't remember where we even got those codes, but we knew several of them for many of our games. So you brought up MMOs, and I've noticed MMOs do a decent job, I think, of putting people together to play the game together. They were one of the first games that I saw that actually forced people to get together and play the game cooperatively in order to accomplish a certain goal. And in order to do that, they provided specific tools for people who are playing the game to actually be able to get together, form static and also dynamic kind of groups. What are some examples of some in-game social capabilities that are required in order for a game today to succeed, do you think?
I think the capacity to group is a fundamental foundation of the MMO. When I came to the MMO party quite late, I started playing Lotro in late 2008, just after Mines and Moria had been released. But obviously there have been plenty of other MMOs in existence for several years before then. And they were, as you said, a lot more focused on grouping, and the ability to do content in groups was essential. There's always an element of material built into the game that was just not possible to do on your own. So there was a requirement for you to play collaboratively. And Lotro, for example, was a game that always, right from the get-go, had voice chat built directly into it, was very useful. And within the Lotro forums at the time, there was the capacity for people to create their own little mini blogs and communicate with people in those respects. So there was always in those days a heavy emphasis on grouping. And I do actually feel that it's something that's been sort of somewhat diluted over the years. I mean, particularly now when you look at it as a game that's as casual as, say, Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, I think when I started playing Lord of the Rings Online, which was also my first MMO, so we've got that in common, I had fully expected to go through and play that game and never have to interact with another person because that's all I knew. And when I got into the game and saw these quests labeled Fellowship, and some of them were required to get through, especially for the epic questline ones that were early on in the game, I started thinking, man, maybe this isn't the thing for me, because I had fears about, I'm probably not very good at this game. And I came in, I think, 2011 maybe. So it was even several years past when you started playing. What if, what if nobody wants to play with me because I have no experience? I don't know how these things are supposed to work. I especially don't know how to play in a group already, because I've never done that before. So there was that fear that I didn't even really want to get into the massively multiplayer part of that online game. I liked that it was online and that it was a persistent world and that it was Tolkien's world, but I really did not look forward to the grouping aspect. And of course, ironically, I think as things moved along, grouping and meeting people and being involved in a kinship that I really enjoy is one of the things that has kept me playing as long as I have that specific game. Kind of like the points that we brought up at the beginning. There's been times when especially in the last 6 months or so, when I thought, I've done about all I can do in this game now. But in the back of my mind, I go, I kind of like to get on just to see if so-and-so is logged on tonight. And so I go and do that,
Indeed. Yes. I think I have a very strong affection for my Lotro guild, because it was the first guild that I'd ever participated in. And this was in the first MMO that I was ever playing. I approached that MMO knowing in advance that there was going to be a requirement for social interaction. And actually at that time, that was something that I wanted. It was at a period of my life where I had a great deal of available time, so I could invest that in the game without it being at the expense of anything else. I wasn't doing a great deal of social activities in the real world at the time. So it played exactly into what I was looking for at that moment in time. And I think one of the reasons that I haven't had quite the same experience in other MMOs that I've played since Lotro was because I've just never found another guild really of the same caliber. My relationship with Lotro and several other MMOs at the moment is somewhat sort of casual, and I won't say indifferent, but I play them as and when there's new content. It's not something that's on my agenda all the time. But with Lotro, there is a strong desire to log on sometimes, not to actually play the game, but just to check in with friends and buddies and to see how everyone is. And I think that was recognized at the time, that sort of period in the late 2000s or the mid 2000s to late 2000s. And it was taken as read that most MMOs had that sort of requirement built into them, that if you wanted to get ahead, you needed to be with other people, you needed to be in a guild. And guilds were self-regulating. People came to guilds and quickly understood what was required and how they worked and what part they had to play within them. And I think a good many listeners will have, and still do have, very strong links to specific guilds because they were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, when I will say, and I've not played Guild Wars 2 a lot, but I did buy the game when it first came out, and I've kind of been in this constant, let's sample what comes out when I can, because even though I think Lotro still has plenty of years ahead of it, I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. And so it's kind of like, make sure that you have a backup plan for when something goes awry in your favorite MMO. And with Guild Wars 2, it was such a shock to the system when you were used to, like you said, getting in, you knew your kinship, you knew what role you were supposed to play. When somebody said, do you want to run library tonight? You said you knew exactly what you were supposed to do in that. My experience in Guild Wars 2 was not one of community. It was one of, we all happened to be in the same place shooting at the same thing at the same time. And when that was over, everybody went their separate ways without saying anything. And so to me, I never really got much out of that whole experience.
It is a totally different experience, Guild Wars 2, to a lot of other games. With older MMOs, you do things for mutual support. You do things out of friendship. You run old content to help new players get through it. in Guild Wars 2, there's a sort of faux sense of community. You say, hey, look at me, I'm rezzing someone, or I'm participating in this, but you're mainly doing it not because you have any real sense of social obligation. It's mainly because you're getting offered a carrot on the end of a stick. You're getting XP. It's to your advantage to do it. So you're doing something because you get something out of it, where I think in older MMOs, you were doing things with other people because you enjoyed that process in itself.
So what do you think are the downfalls to the in-game community? I can think of one that you and Brian have mentioned previously, I think, on Contains Moderate Peril, which is the tools that are available. You don't really get to know the people to the point that if something were to happen to them outside of game and they wouldn't show up for a long period of time, say somebody got in an accident that's in your guild, and even if you're very close to that person, you may not know anything about it, why they've disappeared for the last 6 months, and you are not able to reach out to them, and unless you have some kind of out of game connection. So one of the downfalls to the tools that are usually available in game, in my opinion, is that can happen, or somebody can completely leave the game and you would never even know it. They wouldn't come back and they'd be gone.
Indeed, yes. MMOs, their greatest asset is the players. Their greatest bane and burden is the players at the same time. That duality is very, very interesting. What are the major downfalls of game communities? Well, I think we've all experienced it at some point in our guilds. Every now and then there can be elements of drama. Wherever there's people differ, people have different reactions, different outlooks, and sometimes there's a little bit of friction and there is some conflict. With big guilds, to be honest, it's not really a thing about guilds. Wherever you have a group of people, a large enough group, you always will get some sort of clique or hierarchy or strata. It's just human nature that people split themselves off into groups. And sometimes I think in gaming communities that can be problematic. You get the people that always raid and they always invite the same people. And sometimes some people feel excluded out of that. So that in itself can be a bit of a problem. I think the move towards casual gaming has exacerbated this. People aren't so invested sometimes, or they join a guild or participate in a community for how it benefits them rather than how then they can benefit the community. And controversial point coming up, I still believe that free-to-play, one of the downsides of it is sometimes because there is no bar to entry, it will sometimes attract some problem elements who literally arrive just to grief. And unfortunately, I've had experience of that before. So really, the downfalls of in-game communities are just the sort of standard human factors that come up whenever you see groups of people interacting together. Some communities are very good at self-regulating and policing themselves and tick over very nicely. Sometimes the more competitive ones, because of their very nature and what they're built upon, maybe they will be more disposed towards a little bit of conflict, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen that as well. Even outside of guilds, I've seen at certain fan sites, social dynamics take effect where that hierarchy that you mentioned comes into play. The more diligent commenters tend to be placed on a pedestal, whether they want to be or not, and that's probably a whole nother offshoot. But I think you're right. Anywhere that you have people, you have the problems that people bring.
I also think there's a burden sometimes for the actual game developers to participate within these communities, and if the game developers have put down a set of rules and conditions of how people are supposed to conduct themselves, be it on a forum or in the global chat, I would like to see sometimes the developers policing that a little bit more. I know some do, and I also know that some don't. Brian himself has said on the Contains Moderate Peril podcast before that he's reported people for being absolutely abominable to other people. And 48 hours later, the same offender is still running around doing it. So clearly no action's been taken. Not all games are like that, but I do think sometimes, touching upon one of the points you made within the opening, that it's that gaming communities are a two-sided blade and need to receive the professional and quality support from the game operators. And I think that's one area I think they need to step up to the mark more.
So I know, Roger, that one of your passions is developing community. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on for this episode. And I've seen it firsthand. I've been a part of it, and I've seen you do it for other folks. And I wanted to touch on one of these community building exercises that we're participating in right now, the Newbie Blogger Initiative. So could you tell us a little bit about that and how you're involved with that?
Indeed, the Newbie Blogger Initiative started in May 2012, and it was originally the brainchild of Justin Olivetti, SIP, who writes for Massively and has his own website over at BioBreak. And he just thought it would be a good idea to have an event in which he reached out to all the existing content creators, primarily that was game-related bloggers, and say to them, let's hold for the duration of a month an event in which we offer guest posts to new bloggers, we set up a forum and put a knowledge base there and try our utmost to encourage people to pick up their virtual pen, as it were, and get writing and blogging. And the idea was to do outreach work and to interact with new people and to support them. And it was a very well received undertaking. SIP only initially envisaged it to be a month-long project, but he left the original forums up for as long as he could manage to do so. And in the following year, myself and Doon Woodtack, both independently of each other, got in touch with SIP and said we would like to take this forward again and make it a regular undertaking. So SIP said to me, go and run with it, and he put me in touch with Doon Woodtack, who writes over at XP Chronicles. And last November, the Newbie Blogger Initiative raised its head for a second time. Now, it was done on a wing and a prayer last November. It went well, but it wasn't as well organised as we would like it to be. So this year, it's coming up again in May, and we now have a very clearly established full-time forum in place. There is a blog as well. There are people being actively recruited as sponsors and mentors, and we're looking to do everything that we've done previously, but we're looking to do it a lot more overtly and hopefully involve a lot more people this time. And it's not just focused purely on game blogging. It's if you podcast, if you live stream, if you just tweet a lot, we want those people to come on board and be involved. And it's not just about the people that create content, it's also about the people that consume content. If you like reading game-relating blogs, come to the NBI forums, because we will be able to hook you up with all sorts of new sites that you didn't know were there, and it's a great place to see emerging sites. There are quite a few people now who are celebrating their first year in the blogosphere, as it were, because they came from the 2013 Newbie Blogger Initiative or the 2012. Old Murph over at Murph Versus is a veteran of last year's campaign, and it's just great. It's just a great way to get involved, to meet other people, to share ideas and share the things that we're passionate about, and it can work on so many levels. And I think anything that encourages people to create content and to communicate is a good thing.
And I will say that I am a newbie this year. I am participating in the NBI. And I asked Doon about this because this podcast doesn't come out until the very beginning of May, and the NBI is starting up in May. He said you can join anytime throughout the month of May. So if you're listening to this and it's May 15th and you say, whoa, I never heard of this. This is a really cool thing. Come on over. We're not going to turn anybody away. I say we. I'm a newbie, so I guess I can't say we yet.
No, you say we, because that's it. You're involved. This is the thing. It's not a them and us thing. It's a very sort of amorphous, horizontal sort of thing. You know, we just want everyone to come along and be involved.
The two qualifications for being a newbie initiate are that you are thinking about starting a blog, podcast, or stream, and you would like to do it, or you have done it, started a blog, podcast, or stream within the last year and did not participate in last fall's NBI. And I actually fall into that second category because I started my blog halfway between that NBI and this one. And I'm actually going to have a post coming out about my thought process there, I think tomorrow, the 25th of April. So if you want to look through that at braxwolf.com, you can see I actually didn't fall into the let's start the blog when the NBI starts. I started it kind of halfway between. I even involved myself in the forums halfway between. One of the few people that was, inserting myself not during the actual session of the NBI, but sometime outside of that. And here we go. I'm going to see how it goes. May is an extremely busy month for me. Probably out of my busy life, May is the busiest month of my busy life because I have so many holidays that fall in that month. But this is going to be, to me, the reason I did it was this is going to be the only chance I have to do it. Next year, I will have been blogging more than a year, so I will no longer qualify under one of those two qualifications. And I wanted to really put as much as I could into it. And so, like I said, to Dune, there's going to be some late nights for me, but I'm going to make the most of it.
I would just like to take the opportunity at this point, if I may, just to say that Dune Woodtack has thrown himself into this task unreservedly. The gentleman is clearly passionate about the Newbie Blogger Initiative. He's passionate about gaming and talking to other gamers. And he's the sort of gentleman that when he's into something, he is into it with capital letters. He's taken so much on board and just gone with it. There is so much content on the forums. Because of him, he has structured those forums. He has done so much to get other people involved. And it needs recognition and thanks, because you very seldom find people who are happy to get involved at that level and do it because they love doing it and do it for free, which is always good.
Yeah. And I'm going to put out there too, even though I'm involved as an initiate this year, if you have not started a blog or podcast and you have some questions about how that works, I've recently been through that. So I will offer myself up as kind of a quasi mentor for people who are just starting up and have no idea where to start. And I can at least offer that much information as to what I've done and what worked for me. And I might actually refer you to some people that have been doing it a little bit longer just to get a second opinion.
This is the great thing about the NBI. You can go to people directly. You can go to the NBI blog that will have posts that have been there for a while, and there'll be new ones added that will provide you with FAQs on how to do things. If you go into the forums, you will find plenty of threads addressing some of the most common questions that come up when you start blogging or podcasting. There is the opportunity to hook up with other people so you can guest write on larger established sites, which is great for bringing exposure to your work. There's the opportunity, if you really want to be hooked up with an established blogger and actually mentored on a one-to-one basis, if that's what you're looking for, or if, as I said earlier, if you just want to go along and read and find things out or just discover other new sites, it's there. Participation happens and is accepted at any level. Just get people there and get people spreading the word.
Yeah, and I think we've even possibly glossed over the most obvious point, which is that there will be exposure there. If that's something that in fact, that's something that everybody who's just starting a blog needs, because one of the difficulties that we mentioned earlier was starting a blog is a lot of work. And how do you market that? How do you get that in front of people who want to see it? And this is another way to do that, because it's going to be a whole, I'm going to say, virtual room full of people with like-minded interests that are going to read and promote your site for you. Some of them have a lot of views on their site. So that's I won't say a side benefit, because for some people that might be the main benefit, but that is another benefit of participating.
Indeed, and I'm going to do a cheeky piece of shameless self-promotion here at the moment. One of the things that stemmed from the 2012 MBI was I decided to create an aggregation website called the Gaming Blog Nexus, where effectively, if you run a gaming blog, get in touch and your RSS feed will be added to the site, and any post that you make, the first paragraph of that post will appear on the Gaming Blog Nexus front page, so people can come along, see it and think that's an interesting article, click on the link and it takes them directly to your site. It's just a question of getting all these hundreds of separate RSS feeds that are all out there and just getting them in one place, and therefore it's very good for people that like to read, and it's very good for bloggers for getting eyes on their websites. And that directly stemmed from the original Newbie Blogger Initiative, because I just thought it was something that needed to be done.
Now, since this is an episode about community, let me bring the NBI question back. How do you see the Newbie Blogger Initiative enhancing the overall gaming community?
Oh, that's a multifaceted question. I think that we are living in unparalleled times. You look at modes of communication 20, 25 years ago. I look at how things were when I was growing up. When I was a kid in the 70s, the newspapers were a closed shop. You had to go to university, study, get a degree in journalism and work your way up before you could get anywhere near a newspaper and get your views out to the people. It was the same with television, radio, anything like that. These were gated communities that weren't open to everybody. And then in the last 2 decades, the internet has come along and there has been this mass democratization of tools. You can write, broadcast, publish now about anything at any time, and there's virtually no barrier for you to do such a thing. And I think it's great that people have got the opportunity now to express themselves and get in touch with other people with similar opinions and views and likings all over the world. It's an incredible thing when you think about it. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the MBI is just a facet of that great opportunity. Being able to write about the games that you enjoy and then speak with other people who have had similar experiences is a great thing. If you've been working really hard to clear a dungeon and you finally figured out a way of doing it, and then you can put out a video, you can put out a guide, you're helping other people, and then people get back to you and say, that's great, I've been doing this for months and I've been beating my head on a brick wall, I never thought to do it this way. It enhances the gaming experience. It's strange in a way, because I've always been a bit of a sort of a person that takes themselves out of structures and hierarchies and communities, and it's rather sort of paradoxical in a way that I found myself now involved, although that's not what I intended to do. But I feel quite passionate about it, and blogging and building communities is invaluable. I think we live in times now where the traditional media outlets are not held in such high regard as they used to be, and people, particularly gamers, are more trusting when they're getting information from another gamer, a person who hasn't really got any axes to grind apart from just playing the game and having fun. And I think that the MBI encourages people to communicate, participate, and it feeds off itself. Yes, you're going to get some white noise. You're going to get some people on the fringe that will use blogging and podcasting as platforms for being problematic. But by and large, the positive aspects completely just outweigh that. And I find that we need to to utilize these tools that are at our disposal, because if we don't, we could end up losing them. And I think that wouldn't just be bad for gamers, that would be very bad for society per se.
Wow. So participate in the NBI or society will crumble.
That's right. We will be living in some heinous dystopian future with dogs and cats living together. It will be anarchy, I tell you. Also, look at it this way. There's blogging, podcasting, live streaming, communicating, running a forum, interacting with people. These are not only are they socially beneficial, these are great skills to acquire, and they are transferable. That's a good thing for personal development as well.
Yes, that's true.
And putting aside all the highfalutin stuff, you talked earlier about MMOs and guilds, and sometimes when people drop out, you wonder what's happened to them, and there's not always an effective way. I find that the flip side is that through communities, blogging, talking to people, you develop friendships and expand your social circles and meet people that you wouldn't normally speak to or interact with. I mean, I love the international nature of the internet, the fact that you speak to people from all around the world, I speak to people from all around the world. This is a great thing. It's just very good for us on a social and human interaction level.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In fact, whenever anybody comes and asks me why I'm involved in the community, I have to tell them first and foremost, I do it to have fun. And quite honestly, if I'm not having fun, I really need to take a step back and figure out why I'm doing it, because it's an extension of the gaming that I do, which I also do to have fun. But when I decided to get into the community a little more heavily, it was based on the fact that, this gaming thing's pretty fun. What if I just kind of extend that? What if I get involved a little bit more? Would that be even more fun? And it turned out that it was. So I think you always kind of have to come back to that.
Yeah, sometimes I think that's the thing that gets overlooked. It's the fun factor. Just expressing yourself. If you've had a good evening where you cleared that dungeon, or you finally killed the final sheep squeezers from Splatoon 4, and you finally got the Uber Sword of Uberness, you want to share that. And then it's really nice when the next day you might have got a comment that said, "Oh, that's great, I'm really pleased for you," or somebody else said, "Oh, that happened to me the week before." It's just, we're human beings. We're hardwired to be social and to interact and communicate. It's part of what makes us what we are, and therefore I just think it's important that we do that to some degree in our lives, and not to do it, I think, is not particularly healthy.
So moving on to feedback, I got one email this week, and it was from Randolph, who has emailed me every single episode. He's the most consistent emailer, and I always read his emails because I like interacting with Randolph. Randolph says, "Thanks for reading my email on your podcast again. It's always a surprise to hear something you've written read out loud on a podcast. But I'll admit it's certainly far from unpleasant." He's going to get me an iTunes review up soon, and he says I deserve more than 5 stars. Well, sorry, Randolph, that's all you can give. Maybe you can carry some over for a second review or something like that. Enjoyed the podcast again. I knew next to nothing about Machinima, referring to last episode 4. That's changed now, thanks to you. Looking forward to your next episode. Yeah, we had a lot of fun talking Machinima with Pash last time, and I didn't know much about it either, other than what I'd seen him do. And listening to his process was a really fun thing for me. It's going back to learning something new. That was interesting for me.
I found it a fascinating episode because it just brought into perspective the amount of work, but it was done with abject dedication. There was no sort of animosity towards the work. It was just a labor of love, and it shows.
Yep, it does. Now, moving on to iTunes, this is kind of funny because last time I begged and pleaded for iTunes reviews, and it was actually Roger who brought up to me not long after that episode, reminded me that iTunes is regionalized. So I actually do have 5 iTunes feedbacks, but they are divided among different countries within iTunes. And that's a good thing, though, because that, going back to what we just finished talking about, that that shows that I have worldwide appeal, I guess. What I'm going to do from here on out, I think, because this is the podcaster's bane, I guess, is iTunes reviews. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top 3 countries that hit my blog, braxwolf.com, and I'm going to look for iTunes reviews under those countries. And if you are not in the United States, the UK, or Canada, would you please let me know if you leave me an iTunes review under your country so that I can read it on the podcast, if you want it read on the podcast. Because those are the 3 countries in that order that have the most hits on my blog, and so the most likely reviews will be under one of those 3. Under the U.S. iTunes review, I got one from my friend Draculetta, who I work with on Lotro Players News and Lotro Players. He said, is one of those podcasts that you wait for to come out every month to see what the topic will be and who the guest will be. Braxwolf does a wonderful job keeping the show moving and on track. A great listen. Thank you, Drac. Look forward to doing LPN with you this week again. I got one from Iogro Marybelly, who is actually another initiate in the Newbie Bloggers Initiative this year. And he does a Lotro blog with his wife. He's just starting it up, called ahobbitsjourney.com, I believe. Iogro says, I have to say, Beyond Boss Fights is one of the most engaging podcasts I've listened to in a long time. If you haven't checked out Brax and his work, you're missing out big. Thanks, Brax, and keep up the awesome work, bro. Thank you, Iogro. Appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing some of your posts for the NBI this year. I also found a review in Canada, the Canada iTunes site, from, I'm going to spell this name because I don't think I can pronounce it, MaTeK AV, MaTeK AV, I guess. And MaTeK AV says, deep but not too deep. Great podcast. Found this podcast after Braxwolf appeared as a guest on Lotro Reporter. I did that in the last month. That was really awesome. Thank you, Leonor, for inviting me. He actually let me do a mini boss fight, is what I called it on his episode. He basically said, hey, Carrie's not going to be here this week. I'd like you to come on and do your show on Lotro Reporter. And so I had to do 2 Beyond Boss Fights last month. But it was a lot of fun and I guess appealed to MaTeK AV. He said, I thought I would check it out since he claimed to tackle some of those philosophical and political questions that are missed in mere gaming news. Well, he does deliver. That being said, I do wish it went deeper. This could be amended by involving more voices or getting it further underlying questions. Don't mind me, though. I'm a hard-to-please philosophy student. Yes, I'm making fun of myself. And I give this criticism because I already like what Braxwolf is doing a lot. It takes time to do what he does, and I appreciate it. Love listening to this podcast while I play Lotro and wind down. I wish there were more frequent podcasts. So a couple of things in there. And first of all, MaTeK AV, I think that's a totally fair assessment of the podcast. I wish they were more frequent as well. I like doing them. There is a time aspect, though, and I think I addressed that in episode 1, where this type of podcast, especially if you're talking about going a little bit deeper than what I played last week, does take a lot more work up front, I think. I do research. I have to line up a guest every week. And I'm sure you already understand this by your comments, so I just kind of throw that out there. As far as the depth, I also agree with you. I hope that maybe this podcast went a little bit deeper for you, and I think maybe it did. Although I will throw this out there, I'm going to have episodes, it's going to ebb and flow a little bit because there have been episodes where we focus mainly on the topic and delve into that. And there's been a couple that have focused more on the guest and what they do in relation to the topic. And I plan to continue to have some of those because what I like doing is introducing those folks that are out there in the community doing things and having their viewpoint on specific topics. So there are going to be some very deep episodes, and there are going to be some that are more like kind of like an interview of the guest. But I will also say that if you are a philosophy student, philosophy graduate, or in the field of philosophy, I'm probably not going to get deep enough for you because that is not my field of study, and you guys are way out there. I applaud you for how you can get into these topics and talk at such an academic level.
If you're a philately student, we can't really help you because I don't know about you, Brax, but I'm not big on collecting stamps.
No, it's stamps or coins. They're both off the table.
Can I just say, although I know this comment that you just read out wasn't meant as a criticism, I think it's just fair to bring to everyone's attention that this is the 5th episode, and podcasting is very much a thing that as you go along, you just hit your stride and things evolve. So I think there's scope for things. I mean, things are very, very good as they are now, but I think your show's just going to get better and better.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Roger. In fact, I will say that I have one more iTunes review to read, but I will do that perhaps on the next episode because the individual who left it is sitting on the other side of this broadcast. And thank you for that, Roger. I just didn't think I figured I wouldn't embarrass you with your own comments there.
I'm not easily embarrassed, but I can see the point it might come across as being a bit self-serving, mightn't it?
As for the rest of you, you can send your feedback to braxwolf@gmail.com if you want to send an email. I'll read it on the podcast. This is a reminder that Beyond Boss Fights is on iTunes, and I would appreciate your ratings and reviews. It's also on Stitcher. So if you have one of those Android devices that doesn't use the Apple Store or iTunes, go ahead and add it via Stitcher or whatever else your Android device can handle. I want to thank Roger again for being my guest today. I had a really fun time with this conversation.
Well, can I just say, Brax, thank you very much indeed for inviting me on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed this podcast and participating. It's been a great discussion, and it's just nice to be able to actually be on the other side of the podcast for once.
It is, isn't it?
It's quite refreshing. I quite like it.
Roger, do you have any contact information you'd like to give out for people? How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, indeed. Good old-fashioned email, rogeredwards@containsmoderateperil.com. That's email address that goes directly to myself. You can follow me on Twitter if you see fit @moderateperil, and I believe the YouTube channel, which is in development and hoping to do more on in the months to come, is, I think the best thing to do is just search on that More Moderate Peril. You see there's a distinct theme going on here with the names, as it were.
And as for me, you can follow me at Twitter @Braxwolf, BRAXWOLF. Again, you can email me at braxwolf@gmail.com. I have a Facebook site, facebook.com/Braxwolf. I have a YouTube site, youtube.com/user/Braxwolf. And of course, you can find all of my written musings and all of my past episodes of Beyond Boss Fights at the blog braxwolf.com. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope to see you again next month. Thanks for listening.